Evan White, a successful tech entrepreneur and CEO of the Ascendant Aviation, faced shocking discrimination when he was mocked and dismissed at a private airport. Despite owning the jet, he was attempting to board the crew. Dismissing him based on his appearance, refused to verify his ownership, making racist assumptions about his legitimacy. His calm but firm response to their prejudice sparked a confrontation that exposed the deep biases ingrained in the workplace, challenging everyone involved to reflect on their actions and assumptions about race and status. Imagine being denied access to your own private jet simply because of your appearance. What happened next stunned everyone, and today, we bring you the shocking account of Evan White, a self-made technology mogul and CEO of White Tech Innovations. Despite his monumental success, Evan faced blatant discrimination at a high-end airport, where he was ridiculed and humiliated. However, what the staff didn't know was that they were about to learn a harsh truth that would change everything. This story isn't just about prejudice. It's about resilience, accountability, and standing up for what's right. Evan refused to back down, and his actions delivered a powerful lesson in leadership and dignity. Stay with us to discover how this incredible tale unfolds. And while you're here, be sure to subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know where you're watching from as we dive into one of the most inspiring real-life stories you'll ever hear. It was a typical morning at Sterling Jetport, a private terminal located just outside of Chicago. The airfield buzzed with the hum of luxury as sleek black sedans and high-end sports cars pulled up to the entrance, ferrying wealthy passengers to their exclusive flights. Chauffeurs opened doors for impeccably dressed individuals in tailored suits, their every step exuding wealth and privilege. The atmosphere was one of effortless elegance, where the elite moved about without a care in the world. In contrast, Evan White arrived in a modest black sedan, the hum of his engine quiet against the backdrop of the fancy vehicles surrounding him. He had just returned from a successful product launch and was now on his way to Paris to give a speech at an international tech summit. Despite his position as a leader in the world of artificial intelligence, Evan didn't flaunt his wealth. He walked in a casual brown jacket and dark jeans, a far cry from the businessmen who passed him by in their designer suits. He wasn't there to impress anyone. He was there to catch a flight on his own private jet, a jet he had personally funded and named the Ascendant. As he approached Hangar 7, where his aircraft sat waiting, he noticed the crew loitering by the entrance. Among them were Frank Anderson, the airport's chief operations officer, his cold eyes scanning the airfield with obvious disdain. Standing beside him were the flight crew: Kyle Miller, the pilot, a man who seemed to wear a permanent smirk; Rachel Grant, the disinterested co-pilot, who was busy texting on her phone; and Alice Turner, the flight attendant, who had her back turned, as if she were too busy to be bothered by anyone. Evan offered a friendly wave, but it was met with an icy silence. Frank barely acknowledged him, and when he did, it was with a dismissive tilt of his head. The others followed suit, ignoring Evan's presence as though he were invisible. But Evan, unfazed by their cold reception, continued walking. He had faced prejudice before, but this was something new. As Evan stepped closer, Frank's gaze locked onto him, his lips curling into a thin smile. "You here for the Ascendant? Or just looking for trouble?" Frank's voice was sharp, as if Evan were intruding on something far more important than his own aircraft. "I'm here for my jet," Evan replied calmly. "I need to board now." Frank's posture stiffened, his arms crossing over his chest. "Sorry, this is a restricted area. No one without clearance can enter." He gave Evan a slow once-over, sizing him up. "I'm sure your name's not on the list." Evan sighed but remained composed. "My name's on the registration. Look it up." By now, Kyle, the pilot, had joined the conversation. He stood leaning against the hangar door, a smug grin spreading across his face. "This guy thinks he owns the Ascendant," he muttered loud enough for Evan to hear. Rachel, the co-pilot, rolled her eyes. Typical always a wannabe. She made no effort to hide her disdain, muttering under her breath. Evan's patience began to wear thin. He had experienced bigotry before, but never in such a direct form. He kept his voice steady, though frustration bubbled beneath. Check the records, it's my jet, he insisted. Frank scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. Oh, sure, people like you don't own jets like that. I don't have time for your little games. His voice dripped with condescension. People like me? Evan repeated, the words stinging. What do you mean by that? Frank's tone didn't change. I said what I meant. Now, get lost before I call security. Kyle snickered. Maybe he's here to take a picture with the jet, post it on social media or something. He looked at Rachel with a grin. Probably just a delivery guy who got confused. The laughter from the crew cut through the air like a sharp knife. Each comment was a cruel reminder of how Evan was being treated, and it stung more than he'd like to admit, but he wouldn't let it control him. Instead, he stood tall, meeting Frank's piercing gaze without flinching. This is the last time I'm asking, Evan said, his voice unwavering. Check the ownership records and you'll see my name. Frank crossed his arms tightly, but the air between them was thick with an unspoken challenge. I don't care what story you're telling. You don't belong here. Evan stood motionless, his mind racing as he weighed his options. He could walk away, call his assistant, and let her handle the confusion. But something deep inside him refused to let this go. He wasn't just defending the ownership of his jet. He was confronting the prejudice that had followed him throughout his career. This was bigger than a misunderstanding. He wasn't going to let their ignorance stand unchallenged. With a quiet resolve, Evan reached for his phone and dialed his assistant, Sophie. Sophie, I need you to send the Ascendant's ownership paperwork to the operations office immediately, and loop in the legal team as well. His voice was calm but firm. After ending the call, he slipped the phone back into his pocket, his expression unchanged. We're about to clear this up, he said, his voice resolute as he turned back to Frank. The crew exchanged uneasy looks, but Frank remained unmoved, still standing with his arms crossed, exuding an air of superiority. Evan, however, was done playing by their rules. He had worked too hard and achieved too much to let the ignorance of others dictate his day. Let's see how you handle the truth, he muttered under his breath, his stance unwavering as he waited for the documents that would expose the truth. As Evan waited by the hangar, his phone buzzed. Sophie had sent the requested paperwork to the operations office. He glanced over at Frank, who stood smugly with his arms crossed, still unaware of what was coming. Moments later, a young assistant from the operations office hurried toward them, holding a folder in her hands. Mr. White? She asked, slightly breathless from rushing. That's me, Evan replied, taking the folder from her without a second glance. Frank's smirk faltered as Evan handed him the folder. Take a look, Evan said firmly. My name's on every page. Frank hesitated but began flipping through the papers. His expression shifted from disbelief to embarrassment. Kyle, the pilot, leaned over to peer at the documents, his face draining of color. Rachel and Alice exchanged nervous glances, realizing the magnitude of their mistake. This can't be, Frank stammered, his voice faltering. I told you from the beginning, Evan replied, his tone unshaken but sharp. I own the Ascendant. Rachel stepped forward, her voice trembling. Mr. White, we didn't mean... Evan raised a hand, cutting her off. You didn't mean to, but you dismissed me, mocked me, and treated me as if I didn't belong here. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was prejudice, and I won't stand for it. Turning to face the rest of the crew, Evan spoke with quiet authority. All of you, off my jet now. Kyle tried to protest, his voice rising. Wait, we didn't know. Evan's voice was cold as he cut him off. You didn't care to know I gave you plenty of chances to check the facts, but instead of doing that, you chose to belittle me. That's not a mistake. That's a choice, and it has consequences. Turning back to Frank, Evan's eyes narrowed. Effective immediately. You're fired. Pack your things and leave security will escort you out. The crew stood frozen, their arrogance replaced by stunned silence. Evan's words rang in the hangar, each one a reminder of the truth that they had tried to ignore security, now fully briefed on the situation, moved in to ensure the crew complied. Evan watched as they filed out, his expression calm but resolute. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. The ascendant wasn't just a symbol of his success. It was a result of years of hard work, sacrifice, and determination, and he wouldn't let anyone's ignorance diminish what he had built. As the hangar doors closed behind the departing crew, Evan took a deep breath. This moment wasn't just about settling a personal score. It was about standing up for himself and making it clear that such behavior would never be tolerated. Later, as he boarded the Ascendant, Evan reflected on the day's events. This wasn't just a personal victory. It was a powerful reminder of the larger issue of discrimination that still plagues so many. By standing his ground, he had reclaimed his dignity and set an example for others to follow, showing them how to confront prejudice head-on. As the plane taxied down the runway, Evan took a moment to collect his thoughts. He wasn't just flying to Paris to deliver a keynote speech. He was carrying with him a story that would challenge perspectives and inspire others to stand up for themselves in the face of adversity. After the incident, Evan arrived at the headquarters of the Ascendant Aviation for an emergency meeting. The air in the conference room was thick with tension. Every senior executive, department head, and key staff member had been called in. Whispers filled the room as employees speculated about the sudden firings of Frank, Kyle, Rachel, and Alice. When Evan entered, the room fell silent. He moved with quiet authority, his expression unwavering. Taking his place at the podium, he was ready to address the situation head-on. Evan stood before the microphone, his gaze sweeping across the room, ensuring that everyone's attention was fixed on him. The hum of quiet conversations quickly faded as he prepared to speak. "Good afternoon," Evan began, his voice calm but commanding. "I've called this meeting to address something far more critical than our quarterly earnings, market share, or any other business goal. This is about the culture we cultivate here at the Ascendant Aviation." The room fell into an uneasy silence as Evan's words hung in the air. He took a moment before continuing, his tone steady as he recounted the incident in vivid detail. He described the ridicule, the dismissiveness, and the blatant refusal to recognize his ownership of the Ascendant, the jet that had, in many ways, come to symbolize not just his success, but his vision. This wasn't an isolated error or a miscommunication, Evan said firmly, his voice unwavering. What occurred was outright discrimination, an abuse of power rooted in bias. It's a clear example of how prejudice can infect even the most professional of environments. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in, his eyes locking onto those seated in front of him. As the CEO of this company, I am responsible for ensuring that the Ascendant operates with integrity and respect. What happened last week was unacceptable, not just for me, but for anyone who could have been in my shoes. His voice softened slightly, but his resolve remained unshaken. The individuals involved have been terminated for their actions, but this isn't just about consequences. This is about responsibility. He took a breath, then addressed the room with a firm resolve. If we are to lead this industry, we must hold ourselves to a higher standard, not just in how we serve our clients, but in how we treat one another. Evan announced a sweeping set of changes, ones that would shape the future of the company. Effective immediately, we will be implementing mandatory diversity, equity, and inclusion training for all employees, from entry-level staff to the executive team. Respect and ethical conduct are not optional here at the Ascendant, he declared. We will also establish new partnerships with minority-owned aviation firms to create more opportunities for underrepresented groups in our field. Leadership is not about titles or wealth, Evan continued, his gaze resolute. It's about action. It's about changing the culture, especially when no one expects you to. His words echoed throughout the room, striking a chord with many who had been silently reflecting on the changes he was proposing. This wasn't just a reaction to a single incident. It was the beginning of a company-wide transformation. In the weeks that followed, the Ascendant Aviation began rolling out its new initiatives. Training programs were developed, partnerships with diverse firms were established, and a clear message was sent. Discrimination would not be tolerated here, in any form. For Evan, this wasn't merely about confronting what had happened to him, it was about leaving a legacy of accountability and change. His actions proved that true leadership is measured not by the authority one holds, but by the courage to confront injustice and drive progress. The incident at the private airfield had been more than a personal affront. It was a reflection of deep-seated societal issues that still persist. Workplace discrimination, whether overt or subtle, remains a widespread challenge that many individuals face on a daily basis. For Evan, it was never about being denied access to his jet. It was about challenging the stereotypes and biases that often dictate how people are treated based on their appearance. His story resonated deeply with countless others who had faced similar discrimination. Studies show that workplace bias remains a significant problem in many industries. A 2023 survey from the Center for Workplace Diversity revealed that over 60% of employees in the U.S. had witnessed or personally experienced discrimination in professional environments. These incidents ranged from microaggressions to blatant prejudice, and the effects could be deeply damaging, both emotionally and professionally. What made Evan's story so powerful wasn't just the injustice he faced, it was how he responded. Rather than walking away or letting the incident slip through the cracks, he took decisive action. He didn't just stand up for himself. He set a precedent for others to follow. Silence only allows prejudice to persist, but action can spark change. Evan's resilience in the face of such blatant disrespect was a testament to his character as a leader. He understood that true leadership meant confronting uncomfortable truths head-on. His decision to terminate the crew wasn't an act of revenge. It was a lesson in accountability. By directly addressing the problem, he sent a clear and unambiguous message. Discrimination, in any form, would not be tolerated at the Ascendant. The changes Evan initiated at the Ascendant Aviation, mandatory diversity training, partnerships with minority-owned firms, and a renewed commitment to inclusion and respect, demonstrated the profound impact of his leadership. These efforts weren't just about addressing the immediate incident. They were aimed at creating long-term solutions that would foster a culture of equity within the company. For many, Evan's story has become a powerful reminder of the importance of resilience and standing up for oneself. It challenges leaders and organizations to scrutinize their own practices and ask themselves, are we creating environments where respect is a given, or are biases being allowed to fester unchecked? Discrimination in the workplace is not only morally wrong, it's costly. Research consistently shows that companies with diverse and inclusive cultures outperform their competitors by 35% and are far more likely to retain top talent. Yet, despite this, many organizations still struggle to make meaningful change. Evan's approach provides a roadmap for others to follow. Begin with accountability, address the root causes of inequality, and create opportunities for marginalized groups to succeed. A crucial takeaway from Evan's experience is the need to challenge stereotypes head-on. As a self-made entrepreneur and tech visionary, Evan had achieved extraordinary success. Yet, despite his accomplishments, he was judged solely by his appearance. This is far from uncommon. Studies show that biases related to race, gender, or socioeconomic status can influence hiring decisions, promotions, and daily interactions in ways that often go unnoticed. By sharing his story, Evan didn't just highlight these issues. He inspired others to reflect on their own behaviors and assumptions. Evan's public address at the Aviation Summit encapsulated this idea perfectly. Leadership isn't about wealth or power. It's about action. You change a culture by standing up, especially when no one expects you to. His words resonated deeply, not just because of the injustice he faced, but because they spoke to a deeper truth about leadership, integrity, and the courage it takes to confront prejudice head-on. His actions didn't just change his company, they set an example for an entire industry. For those who have watched his journey unfold, it serves as a call to action. Challenge prejudice, advocate for equality, and help build a future where respect and fairness are the norms, not the exceptions. As we reflect on Evan's story, we are reminded of the power of individual action. Progress begins with people willing to take a stand and demand better, for themselves and for others. we invite you to consider how we can apply these lessons in our own lives. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination? How did you respond? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters. Together, we can inspire the change we want to see in the world. Evan White's story is not just an account of overcoming prejudice. It is a profound lesson in leadership, accountability, and the courage to stand up against discrimination. From being dismissed and ridiculed at the airport to exposing the truth about his ownership of the Ascendant, Evan's actions sent a clear message. Respect and integrity are non-negotiable. His swift and decisive response didn't just address the injustice he encountered, it sparked meaningful change. By firing the crew, implementing company-wide diversity training, and forming partnerships with minority-owned aviation firms, Evan showed that leadership is not about titles or wealth, it's about action, as he said during his public speech at the summit. You change a culture by standing up, especially when no one expects you to. His story reminds us all of the importance of resilience and accountability. It challenges us to reflect on how we treat others and how we respond when faced with prejudice. Discrimination in any form is unacceptable, but it takes bold action to dismantle it and create lasting change. As we conclude, we ask you to think about your own experiences. Have you ever faced or witnessed a situation like Evan's? How did it affect you, and how did you respond? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. If this story has inspired you, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. By subscribing, you'll join a community committed to sharing real-life stories that challenge perspectives and inspire change. And if this message resonates with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we can continue to learn, grow, and build a more inclusive world.